It's like the difference between a manager and a leader. And the managers just are there. They clock in, they clock out. They have no real influence or persuasion. They just tell you what to do, and you just do it because you have to. Leaders come in and you want to work for them, right? But that's because you actually enjoy them. You want to work with them. They don't go back to saying, I'm your manager, like you have to listen. They don't have to. They have enough influence outside of their job title, right? And you notice that the guys that are much higher, they don't ever comment on their job title because to them, it's just as boring as anything else. They don't have any personal connection because that job title could be given to you or taken away by somebody else, right?
Welcome back to the Pursuit of Property podcast. Today, it is just my co-host Scott, Farrow, and I. It has been a long time since we have sat down and done a book review. They've always been one of the better episodes that we get feedback on, and so we wanted to sit down, carve out some time to talk about a very important topic, which is leadership. So we'll be covering a book today, sharing our own experiences, tying it in to the book, and obviously giving it our rating here at the end. And hopefully giving you guys a solid recommendation to walk away with in terms of leadership, business leadership, and let's kick this thing off, bro.
Dude, I love it. You know, what's interesting is it's not that we weren't reading books. We just weren't finishing books. And unfortunately, that theme persisted in this book. Cade and I like to set ourselves up with audacious goals. We pre-outline a lot of these podcasts, and sometimes they get rearranged. And so we both read this book in a little bit of a quicker fashion. What I will say is I will 100% be reading this book multiple times.
Absolutely. I think I would put this on a similar tier of some books that we continue to read multiple times. I mean, we've got a couple of them sitting on the shelf. Never Split the Difference, Make Your Bed, a really solid one. Who Moved My Cheese? Like all
How
of these,
to Win Friends and Influence People.
All of these solid books where we continuously reread year over year because they are so solid.
And what I like about this book, let's just introduce it real quick.
Let's do it.
It's How Successful People Lead by John C. Maxwell, who has so many good books. We almost had a hard time picking one of his books.
I know.
But what's interesting is I could see at different stages in my career, I'm going to take different pieces from this book because it does talk about elevating your leadership skills, and it dives in at each level and really gives you more insightful feedback that you can't understand until maybe you're there. And we're not at the top of this. So it's nice because we're seeing it partway through. And certain things here I really focused on, and I actually read a couple of the chapters twice because I really wanted to understand it. So I can tell as I elevate through my experience, there'll be other chapters that will stand out more.
And it's interesting too, we were even talking about this before, as we were reading the book. I mean, we had an episode just a couple episodes ago where we talked about the kind of stages in business, right? The storming, forming, performing, norming, performing, and how it's very fluid from stage to stage. Just because you make it to one stage doesn't necessarily mean you don't jump back or that you stay in that stage forever. And I think it's also interesting to apply that concept to this book because I feel like, again, kind of throughout our careers, we've seen bounces back and forth. We have a kind of a good idea of where we are now, where we want to be, but not necessarily that we're always going to be in the same stage forever.
Right. And the basic principle here is that there's 5 levels of leadership, right?
Yep.
And I feel like this podcast is going to sound similar to that one we did.
Very, yeah.
Because each stage has its own unique pros and cons. And just like you were saying, it's not just because you made it to one stage, you can't go back. You're essentially building up a safety net that, ideally you don't go from a level 5 leader to a level 1. But you may fall back from a level 5 leader to a level 4 in certain phases of your career, and knowing how to get back out of it, kind of a thing.
And the great thing about this book too, obviously we're going to share our experiences, and it's extremely applicable into owning your own business, being an entrepreneur, having your own team. But I think all of the same concepts can be very easily applied, and a lot of good takeaways for maybe our W-2 listeners who are in that grind, in that W-2 job. I feel like these different stages and what you can take from them, what you can take from this book is applicable no matter what industry you're in, no matter what job you're in, whether you're self-employed, entrepreneur, or W-2'd. I think it'll be great for the listeners to take these away.
And I even want to expand that. Like you and I were talking about how my worldview has shifted knowing about the baby.
Yeah.
Dude, I saw this apply even in my family life. Like, you get to level 1 automatically, like it's just given to you.
Yeah.
But then level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, you earn. And like even just applying it to my family life was kind of interesting to think about. And so, you could be a level 5 performer in one aspect of life, but you may only be a level 2 in your family life, right? And you got to elevate all of them if you want to, in my opinion, really kind of be at what we call like flow state.
Absolutely.
So let's just start with level 1. And this is the easiest to understand. Level 1 leadership comes from position or title. And, you and I have both fallen into this, even in the restaurant business, right? Like you walk into the restaurant and you get introduced to the GM, automatically there's like a level of leadership or respect that you give to the GM versus a fellow busser or server.
Absolutely.
But there's no weight behind it. It's just the title. And that's the lowest level of entry for leadership. It's just your title.
Yeah. I mean, the point is people are following you or you are following somebody essentially just because they have to, not necessarily because they want to, right? We've all had that asshole GM, that asshole manager, that asshole, shift lead. And again, because the title is there, whether you're following or you may have people underneath you, this stage 1, that's the key difference. They are following you or you're following them because they have to, not necessarily because they want to.
Yeah. And I think you can always tell who's in that stage 1 because they always go back to that role. It's their pride and joy is that they're in that role. And, you and I have to look at ourselves because we've both been put in positions of leadership. And there's both of us have had times where we rely only on the fact that like our title indicates that we make the decision here. And that's usually the worst place to be.
Yeah.
And falling back on that just demonstrates that you haven't elevated to the next level.
Yeah. And there's a reason this is at the bottom of the totem pole of these 5 stages, right? And again, to kind of reiterate this same concept, it's because people follow you based on obligation rather than you having any sort of genuine influence. Again, this position relates back to the title, right? You have inherent leadership or authority just solely based on your title. You have not established any genuine influence. People are following you because they're obligated to follow you.
Right. It's like the difference between a manager and a leader. And the managers just are there. They clock in, they clock out. They have no real influence or persuasion. They just tell you what to do and you just do it because you have to. Leaders come in and you want to work for them, right? But that's because you actually enjoy them. You want to work with them. They don't go back to saying, I'm your manager, like you have to listen. They don't have to. They have enough influence outside of their job title, right? And you notice that the guys that are much higher, they don't ever comment on their job title because to them, it's just as boring as anything else. They don't have any personal connection because that job title could be given to you or taken away by somebody else.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And the important piece of advice for leaders in this stage, more often than not, people are starting in this stage, whether you're recently promoted or recently, bringing on your first team member if you own a business, is do not stay in this stage. You cannot be an effective leader if you're always at level 1 based on your position, just solely based on your title. So the big action item here is focus on learning, focus on growing, focus on connecting with your team members, or if you're if you're in that position as a leader, focus on connecting with your team members, building that trust, building these things that are important to push you out of this level 1 into level 2.
Yeah, if you have if you don't have a relationship with people that you are supposedly leading, you aren't leading, you're managing. And I think this is like the first class route to get kicked out of leadership. If you can't even inspire your team to follow your lead, all you do is dictate. Nobody likes that culture, and especially like with the company we work with Pinnacle, we care more about the culture of the team than we do about one person's feelings. And so if one person gets the ego boost from being on the leadership team or having a leadership role, that's not enough. The team needs to feel inspired to follow that person, right?
Yeah.
And the best, well, at least in Maxwell's approach to it, the next layer of leadership comes from influence of a personal relationship. It's not even production based. It's not metrics based. It's, do people like you and want to even have a relationship with you? So I think that's really the key thing, is just making sure that you're not falling back on that excuse that I'm the owner of the business, or I'm whatever. That's why you should follow me. If you're going back to that all the time, you're showing your hand that you aren't elevating and creating a relationship where you know what that person wants. You're not giving them the opportunity to even want to follow you. They're just doing it because they have to and they need to make a paycheck. And guarantee the first opportunity that they have, they'll leave.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think influence is the key word here as we're talking through these stages. Is as a leader in this level 1 position, you're not deserving of that influence. Influence is not given. You have to earn it. You have to earn it through your people. You have to earn it through the people you're managing. So I think that's really the difference maker in pushing yourself out of level 1 to level 2, is you start to earn that influence by that intentionality to connect with your people and level you up as a leader and not a manager.
And I guess the saving grace here is, if you're on a team or you're in a bigger organization, somebody of influence had to have seen opportunity in you to have put you and elevated you and delegated the title that you are now referring to. But that doesn't mean that you stop there. Now you have to become the person that can lead. And I think, like, even when I got put in my role, I went from being just a salesperson to being the manager of a sales team. And I think on day 1, I didn't realize the responsibility I had signed up for.
Yeah.
Because to me, it was like, I'm just a salesperson with a new title. But what I was getting put into was not the same role. It was a leadership role I have had to develop into, understanding that it's not less work. It's more work, and it's new work, and it's different work. But it's not just like the title.
Yeah.
Like, the title is actually the least beneficial thing that I got from that whole promotion. Is
exactly
not that I can now tell my friends, oh, I manage a sales team. It's the responsibility and the feeling of like actually getting to help people that's important. And you have to grow into that. It takes time.
Yeah. And you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but moving to level 2, which is, kind of titled the permission stage of leadership, right? And in this stage, you start to see your people follow you, not because they're obligated to, but because they genuinely want to. You're starting to build those connections. You're starting to build that mutual respect with your team and the people working under you, building that trust. And I think this is really hard. We've talked about this before, where being a manager and wanting to be a leader, it can be a very big struggle between wanting to be somebody's friend and connect with them on that personal level, and then have the lines blurred to where you still sometimes have to be the bad guy, still have to set those standards and hold your people accountable. And it can also be confusing for your team. If you're continuously blurring those lines, it can be very frustrating as somebody on the team where, okay, that I can talk to this guy like he's my friend. But then you blur the line between professional, unprofessional. So I feel like this stage here, you have to be, again, very, very intentional in how you're building that connection and trust with your team members, so that the authority is still respected, but they're now following you because they want to, not because they're obligated to.
Yeah, and it gave you a checklist as well. Like when you go to be that guy that's enforcing, and it gives you a checklist. Like, and it all had to do with the other person's aspirations and goals. And do I know what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what they like to do, not like to do? Do I know where they want to go? And what I liked about it was a lot more about the person that you're helping than it is as the manager about metrics, right? Metrics are obviously very important, and we'll get to that. But having the understanding of the team that you're actually leading is important, because you can't lead a team to their goals and to your goals if you don't know where they're trying to go. And sometimes, like, I have this problem. I get caught up on getting stuck in the daily tasks of the business, and like, here's like how you run numbers. Here's how you make an offer. I'm not spending enough time with my team understanding, outside of work, outside of all this, what do you want for your life, and making sure that we're developing a path for them to reach that goal. That's how you really build influence, is you can demonstrate genuine interest in helping your team hit their goals. And Jay said it, I think, earlier, the more people that you help, the further you go, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with your team. The more you can help your team hit their goals, the more they will, not because of authority, but out of permission and excitement, follow you to help you reach yours, right? It's creating a community of trust. And you can tell the leaders that have that, or those people managing a team that have the genuine buy-in, right? That's the term I hear a lot, is buy-in from their team, versus the people that are always like, man, my staff is lying to me, or they're not doing their jobs or whatever. And it's like, well, maybe you need to look in the mirror and say, am I actually looking to try to figure out what they want for themselves in their life? And am I building a world that makes that work?
And I think it all starts with, if you're a leader in this stage, you need to be a great listener. You have to be a great listener for your team. As you start to build that trust and that relationship, your team is inevitably going to be more comfortable opening up to you about potential issues within the business, or struggles that they're having, or roadblocks and obstacles that they experience on a daily or weekly basis that they may not have been comfortable enough sharing with you back when you were in level 1. So I think solidifying those skills to be a great listener in this stage, to be able to listen to your team members and take action on what they're sharing with you, whether it's outside of work, figuring out what their personal purpose is, their personal goals, and being able to help lead them along that path and develop them, is really, really big.
Yeah. And obviously everything that we're saying, these are our perspectives.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. But I have found the leaders that I most want to be like are very humble people. And the leaders that I don't want to be like, I call them the managers I don't want to be like, are very egocentric. It's me, 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 me. And the leaders I want to be like are you, 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 you. And a great example of this, and he'll never hear this podcast, is Kayla's old CEO at her accounting firm. His name's John Sensiba. We met John once at it was like a staff party here in Fresno when they opened the Fresno office. This is a big Bay Area firm. And our perception is always that these big firms, they don't care about their employees. We walked in and John knew Kayla by name, had never met her. But like, he took the time to actually know his staff, awesome, understand who they are. And when we came in, it was like he already knew her, even though they had never met, because he took the time to actually study, know who's on his team. And he knew what was going on in her personal life and work life, because the managers report up. But that took time and effort. And like, the thing that stood out to me was he was so humble. You would not have known he was the CEO. If anything, outside of the suit, you would have thought he was just a normal employee at the firm, because he wasn't going around boasting and bragging his title. He had influence. Everybody there loved John because John was a good guy to all of his staff, and he took care of them. And he always was asking, what do they want to do outside of work? And then making it as best available an option for them, right? Within the constraints of having to perform, what can we do outside of making sure we hit the metrics that makes your life good? And I thought that was just really interesting, because humility was a huge thing.
And I've never met this guy, obviously, but even sharing that story, I don't perceive John to be a guy who walks around kind of flexing his title and what he does at the company.
It didn't seem that way. And nobody was scared to approach him. That was something else. Like, none of his staff were concerned about asking questions. He seemed very open to hear ideas. And again, it was this place of humility for him. And I think that's where so much influence came in, because it wasn't, hey, the firm's named after me, it's my show or nothing. It was like, hey, this is a group effort. And the fact that I'm at the top, I am here as essentially to serve you. And I think that servant leadership is the way that I think the best leaders lead.
Dude, side note, when you shared that servant leadership, I think that's actually at least the word serve or something like that. We had a guest on a couple episodes ago, Devaniel.
That's exactly who I was thinking.
He is an absolute stud. And if you guys haven't listened to that episode, go listen to that episode with Devaniel Adams. Freaking amazing podcast focusing on that servant leadership. It's key.
When you're hiring people, it's like what the presidential saying, don't ask what you can do or what the country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I think you need to look at that as a leader and say, don't ask what this employee can do for me. What can I do for them? Knowing that there's certain aspects that they have to perform on, but that given they hit those metrics, what can I do to make their life the best it can be? That's how you really buy in influence.
Yeah. And I think this has been the big theme here in this level 2, being humble. And I think the other word I would attribute is also being genuine. If you are humble and you are genuine, it opens up the door for you to have real influence and inspire the people within your company. Just like the example you shared where nobody was scared to go and walk up to John. And John was in this high level out of the Bay Area.
Hundreds of employees.
Never met probably the majority of these employees before, but walked in and knew Kayla's name and established that genuine connection right up front.
He knew my name when I walked up. And I'm like, there's no way.
That's
so it's just
crazy, dude.
Again, it's coming from a place of humility and creating a relationship that's worth investing into for your employee.
Yeah.
Now it gets to kind of the next stage. So level 1 was just title. Level 2 is relationships. But even at level 2, you can't lead effectively. At the end of the day, if it all came down to who's the friendliest, you and I probably wouldn't be there, right? We have team members that are so friendly. Everybody loves. There's a third step that comes back to production, right? The nuts and bolts of the business and actually creating an outcome that's sustainable, feasible, inspiring. And I think this is where a lot of people have a hard time.
Yeah, dude, it's funny because the first thing I think of here when we talk about production or results is we've seen this before in real life with real companies, but then we've all seen like the movie or the TV show where, the old man owns this huge company and the son gets to immediately step in and start leading the company and then experiences a whole bunch of issues. And when somebody's fed that position on a silver platter and you begin with the title, but you are not building those relationships and somebody coming in has not provided any sort of results. And that's where you start to see that business start to crumble down when somebody gets spoon-fed that leadership position out of the blue is, like you said, you can't just be the friendly guy. You've got to start to provide the resume and the track record and the nuts and bolts of the business to really continue to grow and lead your team.
Yeah. And it's a hard balance to drive any business in a forward and to the right right and upward trajectory, while still maintaining a close personal relationship with each person on your team that you are involved with. But you can't live just at the relationship level, because at the end of the day, you have to take serious providing opportunities that are inspiring. It talked about momentum. It talked about just getting the business going and creating a track record that people will look at, right? It's not, again, just who Cade is as a person. I've got plenty of friends that I dearly like and I'm good friends with, but I wouldn't work with them because they don't have a track record of producing a result that gets me up in the morning and that fits what I want to do with my life.
100%. Yeah. I mean, here is where, especially as you're a leader, and we can use the example of you making that transition into leading a sales team, is being able to provide those tangible results. A business would not be a business if there were no results, if it was not results driven, right? That's at the core of what a business is. There needs to be results. There needs to be something to show for it at the end of the day instead of just a bunch of smiles and pats on the back, right? No matter how important that level 2 stage also is. But being able to build that resume, build that track record, provide to the team and show the team that not only can you provide tangible results, but you can lead your team to provide those tangible results as well. And that inevitably builds their own confidence in themselves and builds the confidence in you as the leader that's helped them get to that point of achieving those results and providing those tangibles that can be shown on the P&L or on whatever KPI sheet that's shown at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it's exactly right. I got put in this position because I was able to demonstrate I could drive consistent, predictable results, right? That put us in an upward trajectory. But you and I both know that the star player isn't always the star coach, right?
Yeah, very
so
true.
You may get promoted because you crushed in your prior role, but you can't go in and then not produce as that next person, right? And so it's been an interesting balance going from being the guy sitting on the appointment to the guy coaching the person sitting on the appointment.
Yeah.
And what the blessing has been here is that I've had the opportunity to work with so many coaching students. I've been on so many deals. I have very tangible credibility, right? There is no question on whether or not I can do this and be in the living room. But I am still in the process of developing credibility with the team that I can give you the game plan so that you can then reproduce those results, right? It's downloading the information that you have into a team, which is not an easy task. It's very different than being a learner. Being a teacher is very different than being a learner. And again, it comes back to understanding what your team's goals are, giving them the tools that they need, still keeping that relationship, but still deriving a tangible result. And on our team, I would say we have great culture, but we have metrics that we measure every day. And when people don't hit those metrics, you as the leader still need to go back and kind of be that person that says, hey, as much as we care about these things, what can we do to still push the needle on the metrics that need to be hit in order for our company to be successful?
Yeah. And looking at what does success look like in this stage? And level 3, the production or the result stage of leadership. One of the common themes we've been talking about a lot lately, just in our day-to-day, has been the concept of momentum, right? And building momentum. And success at this stage not only shows that you are creating and driving that momentum within your team and within your organization, but it's also fostering that culture of achievement, fostering that culture of driving results within your team and within your business. With those two tangibles and those key pieces, that's what success is going to look like for you as a leader in this level 3 stage.
Yeah. And being able to make hard decisions, right?
Yeah.
When you have a track record of production, then you're teaching your team how to produce. Inevitably, you're filtering out all the easy questions, giving them the autonomy to solve that. But then they come to you willingly because they trust that you make good decisions. And so when a hard problem comes up, you get called and you have to rely on your own experience to make a decision that's beneficial, and the team will follow you because you have a track record of making good decisions. So this is a great example. If you make a series of bad decisions, you can fall out of this production, this level 3 leadership, and they may start wondering, well, Scott, you bought this house, you did this thing, you did that aren't working. They start having doubt in your production potential, but you still have that relationship, right? Because that's not tied to numbers. It's tied to, does Scott care about me? Does Cade care about me, right? So you have the safety net that you're not going to fall down to just positional leadership. It's not a lack of Cade or Scott caring, but can we trust that their decision-making is good for us?
Dude, that's such a great example of how you can transition back down. Dude, that's 100% right, because then if that doubt is starting to foster in your team, and now you're transitioned back to level 2, now you have the extra work of rebuilding that trust in the professional setting with your team to where, okay, it's not going to be easy to forget this bad track record or the track record of making bad decisions, but you as a leader, there's inevitably always going to be that bad decision. I think it's a matter of how do you act on that bad decision? How do you share the intricacies of that decision with your team? And how do you pivot to not make that bad decision again?
Yeah, and giving your team credit when things go right. And
absolutely.
Then having broad shoulders and taking blame when things don't go well. And again, having that extreme ownership that at the end of the day, if production isn't happening, no matter what my team's doing, I am responsible for it. And then can you handle that without critiquing, without belittling, without talking down on your staff, but instead uplifting them, taking that opportunity to learn from the mistakes, and then creating an environment that encourages people to take risk, to try to make decisions, and when they're uncomfortable, to come back to you and say, hey, I make mistakes all the time. You see it all the time. Don't be scared of making a mistake. Be scared of not taking the risk or not learning from the mistake, right? You can't repeat the same thing over and over, but if one of our team members makes a mistake, they're no worse than us. We do it all the time.
Yeah. You made a great analogy earlier, and that's like when, an absolute A+ star player in their sport retires and then moves to coaching.
Tom Brady, we're looking at you.
And it's very interesting to see because it's not a one-to-one transition. I feel like more often than not, it's actually a pretty poor transition. And we talked a little bit about, the concept of developing others. And that's where level 4 of leadership really comes in, where you're focused on people development. Can you show that you are capable and willing and intentional and genuine and humble in helping other leaders grow within your organization, right? Are you able to download what you've done into somebody else and help them grow as a leader themselves?
Yeah. The book makes a really, really good point. Maxwell, not the book didn't do anything, but Maxwell makes a really, really good point that a lot of leaders get stuck in the production stage out of insecurity that if somebody else that is under me gets taught what I know, will they be better than me? And it's such a ass backwards way of looking at it, because at the end of the day, if your ego is not tied to your role and it's tied to your own influence within your team, your opportunity to be something that is better than what you are today, that's more important. And so that level 4 is coming from a place of security that no matter if I teach Cade or I teach a coaching student, it does not take away from my own ability to continue to develop, right? And so a lot of people get stuck in that production phase. They never get, and I think he calls it the reproduction stage, which I guess that makes sense. You're reproducing kind of the leadership role. But, if you're not helping your staff become leaders themselves, what are you doing, right? You're just holding down the potential of your own people. And if you really care about them, why would you do that?
Yeah. The Maxwell shares a really important concept that I think is a great takeaway. And essentially, it's a true leader creates a legacy by reproducing leadership in others, right? And I think we've started to experience that from our mentors and, the people that we've worked with, and they helped grow us. And now we're kind of in this position where I feel like we both identify as being in this level 3 that we just talked about. And it's, okay, to be a true leader, how do I walk this out of trying to reproduce this leadership into my team and into other people? It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody directly on your team, but you talked about coaching students. You can talk about your family, your children, right? Your brothers, your sister, whoever. But how do you reproduce this leadership in others? And that's where the value of being a true leader really is.
Yeah. And it's taking that ego out, being scared of people outshining you. I mean, it's just the most self-centered way of looking at it. And if you want to be a leader, you cannot be looking at yourself first. It needs to be, how can I help others? And if you do a good job of that, you already elevate anyways, right? Nobody looks at the CEO who hands it off to the next CEO, and that second CEO may have a better production. But everybody knows the first CEO who taught this guy still played a part, right? It's getting the opportunity to share in the success and not always have the spotlight. That's where you start seeing really great leaders come out.
100%. And I feel like that's a great transition. Where we see really great leaders come out, let's talk about the 5th and final stage of leadership, which I think is pretty funny that it's dubbed the pinnacle, right? This is built on respect. And at this level 5, it's important to preface that there are not leaders in this stage are very, very rare. It is very hard and very difficult to achieve being a stage 5 kind of pinnacle leader. But at this point, you've really not only have gone through level 1 with the title, not only gone through building those closer relationships, have not only gone through building the track record, have not only gone through helping others become better leaders, but now you've built this, this aura or this sense of people now follow you in your business and outside of your business, in your family, because of who you are and what you represent and what you are able to do. And I think that's a really, really interesting point when we talk about there's not a lot of leaders who break into this level 5.
And also notice it says they're not following you, what you represent. Again, it's even more stepping out of the spotlight. You don't get the glory, but it's what you stand for that they're following. And I think it's interesting because when you get to that level, the length of influence that you have is much different. Like Maxwell's a good example. We haven't met him, but we obviously respect what he has to say enough to read his book, but it's because he has the track record. He's created the name for himself. He's produced results consistently. Other leaders reference Maxwell as we read his stuff. That's what we follow, and it seems to work, right? Now it's like we don't know Maxwell from, Joe Schmo, but we trust that he's made such an impact on so many people that it's got to be worth following, right? And now here we are reading this book, and it's like, oh, we're not really following it because Maxwell wrote it. We're following it because every single successful person we talk to says this is a guy that you should listen to. His thoughts are important.
That's a great point, dude. And I feel like, as we wrap up talking about this stage 5 and just kind of recapping what our key takeaways were from this book, I think first and foremost, it's that leadership is a process, right? It's not one and done. It's not you're thrown into level 1 or level 2 and you are deserving or expected to reach that next stage without any intentionality. Leadership is a process. It's not about the title. I think we've hammered that point in well enough through some of the examples we've talked about. It's not about your title. It's about growing through these stages. It's a process, right? There's no perfect blueprint. There's no perfect manual. There's no perfect playbook, but there is a very, very great outline. And I think this book does a great job of how, and us talking through our discussions, what that process looks like.
Yeah, it's a constant pursuit of humility, personal development, community development, and education. I think what you said is right. You never are deserving of any of these levels. And even if you're a guy who's made tons of money, you've had tons of success, you can still be not a leader. If people don't respect you for how you treat others, how you've helped others, you won't lead. You'll just be wealthy. And I think both of us look at it that success is not just the dollar amount that you can create for yourself or others. It also is what kind of an impact do I have for the people around me? And that's really a constant pursuit. And you could do great for 10 years. And if you drop off, you may not fall as far, but you'll still fall off.
Yeah. And you shared that example a little bit earlier too. And I think these kind of next two key takeaways for me kind of go hand in hand. It's one, we hammered in stage 2 and level 2, the relationships matter. Building and cultivating that trust is important, but just as important are the results. Results are essential to be able to not only be an effective leader, but also the business as a whole, your family as a whole, as a family unit, right? The relationships matter. And that's the foundation that a leader is built on. But you also need to remember the results are also essential as well. We talk about that when we looked at kind of level 3 moving into level 4. The results are essential.
Yeah. My last takeaway is the best leaders have a constant balancing act of doing what's right for the people and doing what's right for the business. And there's no formula that will ever be given to you. It's a constant evolution of paying attention to, do we need to focus more on the individuals on the team and create culture and relationships that are worth working for? Or do we need to focus more on production and results? And as you go through that, you will naturally teach and lead people into how do they start becoming the people that are balancing their own lives and helping balance the community. And when you get 20 different people on your team that are all at this production level of leadership, they are all producing a result, and we can focus on creating a community that's worth sharing with others. So that's, I think, my takeaway is just it's an ongoing balance of what's right for people and what's right for the business.
Dude, that's it, dude. Like we started the podcast with, this is one of the factors we always put into when we do a book review, right? We have a book. It's titled The Intelligent Investor, and I kid you not, it's probably about that thick, and I don't think I've made it past page 1 or 2. It could be a phenomenal book, but we always try to ride that balance between also picking books for you guys that are also not those big, lengthy things. This is a pretty simple, pretty straightforward read. Scott already shared at the beginning. I mean, you said, dude, I wholeheartedly agree. This is a book that's going to be implemented into the reoccurring yearly or, multiple times a year, just reading and refreshing on the concepts of this book. So would 100% recommend this to you guys to go check out and read. And I'd say a pretty damn successful bounce back into the book reviews for us, man.
4.5 stars from Scott.
Bingo. I'd go a strong 4.5 as well.
That's it. Well, guys, thanks for joining the podcast. We will have guests on.
Yes, we will.
I don't know if it's next podcast or the one after that.
Next week.
Okay.
Next podcast.
Stay tuned. We have some great guests coming on next podcast.
Boom. There it is. Thanks, guys.
See you next week.